Hello there. Layla is an incredible 4-star cryo sword user who is one of the best shielders in the game, not only to her fantastic uptime, but because she can actually dish out some solid damage and apply cryo pretty consistently. And while I think she's quite the solid unit right now, I think she'll be substantially better moving forward due to the nature of her kit and how it differs from the way a lot of the other cryo supports currently operate. So in today's video, we're going to be going over her artifacts, her weapons, the different team pairings you're going to want to shoot for, and the value of her constellations. So we've got a bit to talk about, but before we do, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed this kind of content. It helps me out a ton. But let's talk about Layla's kit. Alright, let's give you the rundown of Layla's kit. She's a cryo shield support unit for your team, and she largely accomplishes this through a use of her elemental skill and her elemental burst. Perhaps more so through the use of her elemental skill. This is the absolute focal point of her kit, and when you utilize her elemental skill, it generates a shield for your team based off of Layla's max HP. It's a cryo shield, just as a reference there, but not only that, it slowly generates night stars around your character, and when that night star total becomes 4, it fires all of them off in a volley, dealing cryo damage to nearby opponents. Now, it doesn't stop there, because if a character protected by the shield utilizes their elemental skill, it'll generate 2 night stars, meaning that you can really start to accumulate those stars a lot faster and fire them off faster, and therefore dealing more cryo damage and applying more cryo in general. But it doesn't stop there, because if you utilize her elemental burst as well, it deals AoE cryo damage. It has like a, big circle or whatever, and it slowly fires off homing AoE cryo projectiles. But not only that, when those starlight slugs from your elemental burst hit opponents, it generates a night star for your Curtain of Slumber, which is the elemental skills shield name. So you're not only generating them passively in general, but if a character uses their elemental skill, you get 2 additional ones, and if you have your elemental burst going off at the same time, it's generating a night star per slug hit every 0.5 seconds, meaning that you're going to get a ton of volleys throughout the duration of both of these elemental skill and the elemental burst. But not only that, these both also have a 100% uptime, meaning that their duration and their cooldown are the same. So immediately after using your elemental skill or using your burst, whenever the cooldown is over, you can use it again, energy permitting and whatnot, for the elemental burst in particular. A couple important notes about this elemental skill and her elemental burst is that the actual night stars will disappear if the shield duration ends, and new ones can't be generated while you're shooting off the old ones, so just keep that in mind. Also, the elemental skill technically scales off of attack. It scales with HP later in a passive that we'll talk about in just a second, but the elemental burst scales off of your max HP only. It also has a 40 energy cost, meaning you're going to be able to keep it up relatively easy. Moving on, we'll talk about her first passive, like Nascent Light, and essentially, while Curtain of Slumber is active, the Deep Sleep effect will activate each time a curtain gains 1 night star, and basically whenever you generate a night star via your elemental skill usage through your elemental burst, or just passively, the shield strength of a character under the effect of the Curtain of Slumber increases by 6%, and that effect can have a maximum of 4 stacks and persist until the Curtain of Slumber disappears, just meaning that you get 24% additional shield strength, essentially, which is pretty nice. And then her other passive that we briefly mentioned is the Sweet Slumber Undisturbed, and this just makes her elemental skill additionally scale with her max HP. 1.5% of her max HP will scale with the damage that the elemental skills night stars actually deal. And that's essentially how her kit scales and operates. Her normal attacks don't really matter. You can level those up if you want to use her as some sort of main DPS or anything, but they don't contribute to her kit in any particular way. So yeah, if you couldn't tell, Layla is a phenomenal shield character that can actually deal some solid damage and provide some really good off-field cryo support. The sheer uptime on all of her stuff is really nice, and then not to mention that her shield is actually quite strong. It falls somewhere in between like Zhongli and Toma territory. It depends how many constellations you have on her, unfortunately, and how many constellations you have on Toma and whatnot, but regardless, her shield is strong. And the fact that she can provide some off-field utility is incredibly valuable and is going to play into how you're going to want to build those artifacts. And if you couldn't tell, well, Layla is one of the best Tenacity of the Millilith users we've seen in a little while, as it not only increases her HP by 20%, which is going to increase your damage with your elemental burst, the strength of your shield, and the damage of your elemental skill stuff as well, just because of, it gets that additional scaling from the passive that we talked about earlier. But on top of that, you also get a 20% attack increase to your team and increase your shield strength. This is just hands down the best artifact set for Layla, and is going to play into pretty much all of her teams, whether you're using her as a DPS or not, the best, because it just contributes so well to her kit. But maybe you don't have a good Tenacity set, maybe you're just unlucky that happens. I totally understand. We've got you covered. There are some other options. Things like the Emblem of Severed Fate are okay. Gives you that additional energy recharge to make sure that you're getting that elemental burst off of cooldown, but it also increases the damage there. Same with something like Noblesse Oblige, where it can increase your damage and also still give you the utility of buffing your allies' attack percentage. But other than that, I can't really see myself using any other sets on Layla. If you're using her as an on-feeler, maybe you could use Retracing Bolide for the extra shield strength and the additional normal and charge attack, but remember, this set does not help you when she's off of the field. It only applies to the character who has the set on them, so just keep that in mind. And realistically speaking, Tenacity of the Millilith is just going to be the best on her. So let's go ahead and get into the main stats that you're going to want to look on your Layla as well. And it's pretty simple, really. For the most kind of general build for Layla, you're largely going to be using something like HP percent on the Sands, cryo damage bonus on the Goblet, and then crit rate or crit damage on the Circlet, as this is not only going to buff her shield plenty, but make sure that she's dealing some solid damage, because she can deal some really solid damage. But if you don't care about the damage she's doing at all, then going full HP is totally fine as well, just to make her a shield bot. That'll make her shield the strongest, but she won't necessarily be dealing the most damage. Now, if you really need to, you could replace her Sands here with an energy recharge Sands, and maybe go for like HP percent on the Goblet and Circlet and just go shield bot that way in order to ensure that she gets her elemental burst off of cooldown. Because remember, energy recharge is still going to be important on her, because although it's only a 40 cost elemental burst, she is largely not going to be on the field to receive any of the particles that she generates, so the actual energy intake that she gets is a little bit lower than usual. But other than that, the main stats are quite simple. So what are you looking for in the substats? I think the top priority is going to be something like energy recharge, to make sure you're getting it off of cooldown if you're not replacing your energy recharge capabilities with a weapon or something that we'll talk about later. But energy recharge is very valuable for the same reason that we just mentioned, that she's largely not going to be on the field, so she is going to need a bit higher energy recharge than usual for a 40 cost elemental burst, just to make sure that she's getting it off of cooldown, because getting it off of cooldown is pretty important when she has 100% uptime on not only her elemental skill, but her elemental burst as well. So having those up as much as possible is quite nice. But other than that, of course, you're going to want to look for things like HP percent, especially if you're doing kind of the more general build that I talked about earlier. HP percent on your Goblet and Circlet and your Feather and Flower are going to go a long way. And then crit rate, crit damage, of course, helping out your damage. And realistically, that's it. Attack percent isn't going to hurt so much, just because, remember, her elemental skill does initially scale off of attack percent, so if you get a little bit here and there, it's not the end of the world. But your top priorities are easily going to be energy recharge, followed by HP percent, crit rate, and then crit damage, and then the attack percent is just kind of like an additional, not as bad as you think kind of thing. All right, time for weapons, and hands down, I do not think there is a better weapon for Layla than the Primordial Jade Cutter. It is just so good on her. It not only gives you HP percentage by 20%, makes your crit rate stupid, but also gives you a ton of attack, which helps her elemental skill that we just discussed previously. But of course, you do have some other options. If you don't have this, and maybe you have the Key of Kajni Soot for some reason, that has plenty of HP percent as well. The Elemental Mastery doesn't go as far on a character like Layla, but that is a ton of HP percent right there, and that can help you out a bunch too. But maybe you don't have any 5-star swords. That's quite normal, because you might have been smart and not wished on a weapon banner. So what are your 4-star options for Layla? Well, I think one of your best options for Layla is easily going to be the Favonius Sword, because this gives you so much energy recharge and it gives you the ability to generate so many particles that you can then ignore the need for those energy recharge subsets that we were talking about earlier and focus more in on the actual damage that she could deal through her artifacts. And I think this helps out a ton, and this is probably the best 4-star option in my opinion, but it isn't your only one. You could use something like Amenoma Kageuchi for the additional attack percentage, helps your elemental burst get some energy back. It's not too bad. And then, of course, crit rate and crit damage options aren't awful if you need the additional crit rate and crit damage to round out your stats a lot better. However, other than that, you don't really have too many options in the weapon category, so I would call it a day at Favonius Sword or Amenoma Kageuchi if you only have 4-star options, and Primordial Jade Cutter if you have the 5-star option, as it is really, really solid on her. Alright, so let's talk about her constellations, because like many 4-star characters, constellations are actually quite important on Layla. I don't think they're necessary. She's good without them, so don't go spending all your primos just for constellations. I don't think that's ever worth it. You'll usually get them passively. But they do contribute a lot to her kit and can really level her up in how effective she actually is. So let's go ahead and talk about them. The C1 here is pretty good. Increases the shield absorption of your elemental skill by 20%. It also gives a shield to nearby allies and stuff in co-op. So that's kind of cool. If you play co-op a lot or play with friends a lot, that's a really good utility. Her C2, whenever you're shooting stars from your elemental skill hit opponents, they're gonna regenerate some energy for Layla, which is really nice. This helps out a ton for making sure that elemental burst is off of cooldown, allowing you to relax on those energy recharge requirements that we talked about earlier. And I think this is probably one of our better constellations, as it just helps that consistency so much more. But it doesn't stop there. The C4 is also quite good by allowing you to add additional damage to your teammates' normal and charged attack damage based off of her max HP, which is really awesome in my opinion. I'm mostly excited for this one. I think it'll be really cool for certain builds and whatnot. So I think this is a pretty cool constellation. But again, this isn't like a gigantic buff or anything, but it is still a buff and is quite nice. Now, her C6 is pretty cool because shooting stars from Knights of Formal Focus deal 40% increased damage, and Starlight Slugs from Dream of the Star Stream Shaker, her elemental burst, deal 40% increased damage. So you're just getting 40% increased damage for your homing projectiles there, which is insane because she was already dealing some pretty solid damage. But additionally, the interval between the creation of your Night Stars via the Knights of Formal Focus is decreased by 20%, meaning that you're getting those Night Stars even more often to shoot off more volleys that deal more damage. So yeah, her C6 is quite strong. It adds a lot to her damage in general. And as I said, none of these constellations are required. The best one, in my opinion, is definitely that C2, allowing her consistency to get a little bit of a bump up there. But the C6 is also really incredible for that increased damage. And I'm kind of looking forward to her constellations down the road, as I think they're pretty cool. So where does my Layla in particular that I've been showing you this whole time kind of end up? Well, my Layla ends up at 27k max HP. I think I can push this to 30 or 32 if I get a little bit better HP percent substats on a lot of my artifacts that I'll also show you in just a second. But not only that, she's left with 72% crit rate and 140% crit damage at a very good ratio and only 131 energy recharge. I would really try to bump this up to the 160, even maybe the 200 range, to ensure you're getting that elemental burst as much as possible, because right now I do not get my elemental burst off of cooldown all the time, just because I'm not catching the particles or anything and she's off the field. So getting that energy recharge up there can be pretty darn important. Cryo damage at 46% there from the goblet. But let's go ahead and show these artifacts for you so you know exactly how I got where I got through my substats and whatnot, and then we'll move on to our different team pairings. Let's talk about some of the different teams for Layla, because she fits into pretty much every other cryo character category, where she's going to be good in your traditional freeze comms, actually very good in your traditional team freeze comms, due to how good her cryo application actually is. And if you pair with somebody like Ganyu, who buffs that cryo damage by 20%, and somebody like Mona, who gives that increased damage, you have a really strong freeze team on your hands. But Layla doesn't stop there. She's also exceptional in a lot of different teams that try to do like Vaporize or something, and you could add Layla in there for some additional melt damage, meaning that you're going to get that extra damage just intermittently when opponents are frozen. Of course, be careful of that, because some of our pyro DPSs here like to shatter before they actually melt, so always be wary of that. But Layla does pair well in those kind of melt and freeze scenarios. But what you might not have thought of is how good Layla is with Dendro. So Layla with Dendro is actually quite strong because of course you can get some burning going on with Nahida and then melt with Layla in a reverse melt fashion, and as we said, Layla actually deals some pretty solid damage, so that works out pretty well. And a team like this is quite fun. Of course, we don't have a healer, this is just an example, and I wanted to direct your attention towards Layla's viability in that Dendro kind of scenario, as she can really contribute there. And it doesn't stop there, because of course the other team that I didn't really mention for Layla, the other, cryo reaction that we forgot about there, is the superconduct reaction. Layla is very good with that particular reaction because of how consistent her cryo is. And if you have somebody like a Dendro character like Nahida and a character like Razor, then you're not only getting your aggravates, but you're also getting your superconducts, you're getting shatters every now and then. You get plenty going on here, and I think there's a lot of potential behind putting Layla with Dendro and then maybe something like Electro if they're trying to do, physical DPS. But as I said, it doesn't even stop there too, because that freeze team that we just mentioned, this also works very well in those freeze teams. You slot in a Dendro character here or something, then you're easily getting plenty of free blooms that the opponents are just sitting ducks for, and I think there's a lot of potential behind that, and you can play around with it a ton in my opinion. So Layla not only fits in your traditional cryo teams, but she seems like she's going to be a good pick with Dendro, and I wouldn't be surprised if you see some other characters that pair even better with her moving forward in that kind of Dendro scenario that we just mentioned. But hey, I think that's going to be about it for today's video. Layla is an incredible unit. I really enjoy her. She is probably my favorite shielder now. The consistency of her off-field cryo damage and just having the unlimited uptime on her E-skill and elemental burst feels phenomenal, and I absolutely love it. And I can't wait to put her in even more teams moving forward, because while she fits in a bunch of stuff now, I think she'll fit better in some other teams moving forward, depending on the kits that we get. But hey, let me know how you're building your Layla, if you're building it the same way or a different way, and hopefully this guide helped you out. But other than that, my name is Blossums, and I'll see you guys in the very next video. Peace.